Test. Test. Test.
Hey, Chloe.
Hello.
Hey, Carrie. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Turn my volume down just a little.
Yeah. And then my computer won't turn on.
Uh-oh. Is it plugged in as far as your own?
Yeah.
Or,
I'll date it and then I wait till I get like look at it.
yeah. It just won't. Sometimes.
There's like some light coming, like the
Yeah,
light.
like a little charger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I do the lights. Okay. I'm already like that. Hello, Kelly. Hi, how are you? Good, how are you? Yep. Yeah. Great and good. How's it all right? I have the boys' sports physical. I can take them. How convenient.
Person being on the board.
I know. Well, they went for their like wellness checks and the doctor's like, "You just want me to do them?" Sure, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. They've only been seeing them
Well,
How are you doing?
survive.
I have some pictures for Morgan. Confirmation.
Oh.
And there's double name for your mom. It's just hers, and I After getting given to you.
You don't see anybody anymore.
No, no. Dance look nice, I saw them from the highway. Haven't been up there yet,
He said, I know they're filling the second one.
so, yeah. It's a good crop, but kind of a convenient spot too.
Couldn't resist sending you that when I saw that picture.
Too funny. I'll have to show everyone. And Sandy, you can hear okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the record button as we wait for Ken. And then the other thing to be aware of, so for the first time, we are live streaming on YouTube as well, just for everybody to be aware. Yeah, I did it sort of.
Did it just turn right on?
Yeah, sometimes it's weird with that power button. That's probably dead. I did. Because my mouse never reaches across, so it's always like really spotty. So I'm like, yeah. Oh no, I intentionally moved it.
This is the best part.
Yeah.
This is the best place to be.
It looked like Clint's just here running the meeting by himself. So
I could rearrange that. for you.
yeah. Ken should be here anytime. Oh, there. How long did it say that? There we go. Hey, Ken, are you able to hear us okay?
Hi. Whew. Hello, everyone. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about being late. Hi. Whew. Here. Did you already start or?
Oh, we're waiting.
Okay. Thank you. Hang on while I get my agenda right here. Okay. Sorry about that. It's way different being on a laptop than well, in person, of course. So we have a quorum, it looks like.
Yep.
Is Polly there as well, or?
Yeah, Polly's here. Sure.
Okay. I just didn't see with the camera. There you are. Well, welcome everyone. Well, let's begin with the flag salute, or Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
It was so hard online.
Well, we all know what it says, and we all appreciate it in our however we heard it. So okay. I'm gonna get to here consent agenda.
So the first thing is just to approve the amended agenda.
Correct, yes. So
Amended items.
yeah. So hope everything goes okay with this. I apologize. We had kind of a last minute trip, so I'm away from town, but we have to approve the amended agenda. You're all emailed that amended agenda with additional items due to COVID response plan, I guess. So could somebody move to approve the amended agenda that was sent out?
I move to approve the amended agenda.
Thank you, Sandy. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We'll we'll do the voting the way we've been doing it when it was online more. So is there anybody opposed? Anybody gonna pass? That's not the right word. Okay, then we'll approve the amended agenda. Sorry, I got that before the Pledge of Allegiance, but we have that done. Do we have any speaking visitors today, Mr. T?
Nobody.
Okay. Welcome to anyone who's joined the meeting. I saw Mark hand and I, flipping between these screens. I'm sure we'll go better as time goes by. Oh, there we are.
So just so you're aware too, Ken, and we won't have names necessarily, but we are live streaming on YouTube as well. So.
Okay. Oh, so we could have other people who just watching on YouTube.
Correct.
Correct. Wow, we're really cool in a way, in a kind of a way, doing that. That's great. Okay, so the consent agenda includes the board meeting minutes and the special board meeting we had at the end of July, district financial reports, which you've had a chance to review now, August bills, which are included at the end of the district financial report, surplus property for consideration, and student body reports. So any questions, any corrections to minutes or correct questions on those items?
On the, DIX's name is in the wrong spot on the minutes for the regular meeting.
Which regular meeting?
I think so, yeah.
What does it say?
She's on the board line
Oh, okay.
instead of the this person.
Anything else? Any questions on financials or bills? Okay, then if there aren't any, we could entertain a motion to approve with the correction to the minutes.
I move to approve the agenda with the corrections.
Thank you, Carrie. Do we have a second?
Okay.
Thank you, Polly. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote. Anybody opposed to the motion? Anybody abstain? Then the motion passes unanimously. Okay, so the first item is the school athletic response plan. And will Callie or Mr. Teagues take the lead on that?
Yeah, so I can take the lead, and I asked Callie to come in just to kind of help out with questions.
Okay.
This plan is required by the Idaho High Schools Athletic Association. Callie's been sacrificing a lot of her July to kind of get this figured out. So we have to have it in place and approved by the board prior to the competition being started. The IHSAA early in July, perhaps late in June, came out with some general guidance about best practices for having athletics. And then the White Pine League, in addition, Callie, you've met multiple times.
Yes.
So the White Pine League kind of tried to stay relatively unified, recognizing that districts are in different places, but with coming up with a plan. That the plan has been sent to the public health district as far as the White Pine League is concerned, and has come back with some revisals or some recommendations from the public health district. But this plan is our unique plan for our school that's kind of based off of that White Pine League plan. So just generally, I think I speak for a lot of people in our district when I say that, you know, sports is another top priority for us as we kind of navigate this COVID-19. I think for reasons of mental and physical health, it remains very important that we do our best to offer athletics to our high school kids. It keeps them busy, it keeps them occupied, it keeps their minds on positive things and their bodies focused on positive things too. We're very lucky in our small little school that we have such a high percentage of participation. You know, somewhere around 90% of our students generally take at least a high school sport, and oftentimes in the upper 70s or lower 80s take multiple high school sports and other activities. And so, you know, it's important to do that. With that said, we have to balance that with safety. And again, I would say it's kind of like the education picture with the school. We have to balance not just the safety of our athletes, who are probably in a pretty safe position health-wise, but also the safety of our staff, including coaches, bus drivers, referees that we pay, et cetera. And then also, again, the safety of our community as a whole to kind of prevent the spread of COVID. Athletics, despite all the positive things that athletics bring, it is most certainly an additional risk to our school and even a potential risk to us maintaining an in-person environment. And so that's why we want to be kind of extra careful as communities travel around to watch sporting events, et cetera, that we're doing our best to kind of prevent that spread. So with that said, really this plan covers the fall sports that we're going to be tackling. And because COVID is such a week by week thing, we'll continue to work with the winter sports and develop a plan as the fall season progresses. A lot will be determined in these first couple of weeks of doing this. And we'll see. And some of the winter sports represent considerably higher risk as well than the fall sports. So a couple of general athletic guidelines for the board to be aware of. The first of which is fans. The White Pine League has kind of laid out that the importance of physical distancing in our gym, which will certainly be something that we incorporate or is incorporated in our plan. One thing to consider with physical distancing, it makes it hard, is that, you know, families or family units, people who are consistently exposed to each other in an in-home environment, do not have to social distance when they get to the gym or to an event. But if you're not living with that person, then the district is going to ask that people physically distance themselves. A lot of these, as we talk, and I'll probably say it when we talk about the actual big plan, the education plan. A lot of these people might ask, like, well, if it's not happening in the regular community, why are we doing it as a school? And the best answer that I can give is that, you know, we are obligated as a school, as this gathering place, to follow those best practices. We can't enforce people to do what we might want them to do out of the school. But certainly, as long as they are in the building, we can do those best practices that health professionals recommend to try and help slow down the spread. None of these things in any of these plans is a magic bullet to take away all the risk. But again, just kind of minimizing it, mitigating it. So for our fans, we will be not requiring masks in outdoor events as long as social distancing can be maintained. So that would include for the fall sports, football and cross country. Fans would not be required to wear masks, although in volleyball, inside our gym, fans would be required to wear masks during those competitions, even with social distancing. I think, you know, people might have questions about that, and I think it's fair for the board to talk about if that's what the board wants to do. That is the best practice recommended by both the IHSAA and the National Federation of High School Athletics have recommended that. I think there's an increased risk because of the potential of bringing people in from other communities too. So it's not even quite, it wouldn't just be people from our community. And so there would be that indoor mask requirement. Callie and I have had some conversations about how would that be handled. What if if this document gets approved by the board, what would happen if someone refused to wear a mask? I don't want to get into policing everybody. You would ask someone politely to. You could potentially ask to have them removed for trespass by police. I wouldn't want to get to that. In all likelihood, rather than making a big scene about it, I think if it became a real issue, that I would bring a recommendation back to the board to just kind of forego fans and just play with the kids so that we could keep sports going for those kids. And then, so just a few other things for fans, that physical distancing when using the restrooms. We're looking at converting the restrooms into just single use so that you would know if someone's in there. That way you don't have to worry kind of about spacing or anything else. We have 3 bathrooms. That way we can have a women's, a men's, and then just that family one that we use.
Sean, back
Yep.
you up just
Yep.
a sec on the mask wearing.
Yeah.
So when you say fans, that's high schoolers, whatever, that they're all together in the same building. If they're going to the game,
That
you're gonna want to see them wear a mask.
I think for consistency, that at least that's our plan right now, and subject to board approval is that. And really then it gets kind of rid of, for me, it gets rid of some of the, well, I'm in this position or I'm in this position. It's just a message. And you'll see later on that it will go for, the scorekeepers, the coaches, and the athletes that are not actively competing or catching their breath. I mean, nowhere in here is there a proposal to have athletes who are competing wearing masks. That doesn't make sense, and perhaps
But in
it's a
essence,
risk.
athletes on the sidelines
Correct.
are going to be wearing.
Yeah, they come off they catch their breath. If it's an indoor competition, we would ask them to put their mask on. It's not going to be instantaneous. They might need to get a drink, or you could take it off to get a drink. And we're still planning on selling concessions, so there's a time. You have a drink or something, you can certainly take your mask off. And again, we're not going to be the hardcore mask police, but we are going to ask people to just kind of follow that as a general guideline. At this point, no occupancy limits, as long as we can maintain social distancing. I think we've got lots of room in the gym, and I suppose if it comes down to a big rivalry game, we could kind of take a look at that. Other White Pine Lake schools, Kelly, I don't know if you have a list of exactly where everybody's at, but and I doubt it, but
As far as masks?
yeah.
Genesee is requiring everyone else's at a recommendation point. There are board meetings in pretty much every district tonight though, so that may change.
Yeah.
Pretty much every board so far has said we are only recommending, other than Genesee is required.
Genesee, yep.
It would be us and Genesee if we decide.
So that would be communication for our fans too, so that they know when they go to specific gyms. The White Pine League has decided that each individual district can set the rules that they want. Again, I think that recommendation largely comes from the fact that communities are mixing in that context. Concessions would still continue to be served, and there's some rules in there about that. Workers in the concession stand will be required to wear masks and gloves. Only one worker who is masked and gloved will handle money, which is a potential spread. We have rules for locker room use. We are going to still allow locker room use, and we will be allowed locker room use when we go to facilities, but those locker rooms should be cleaned prior to a visiting team coming into them, and then cleaned immediately after a visiting team has left. The gym, as a general, will be left open. Oh, I might get this weird scroll thing. Doors should be open if possible. Circulation fans running when permissible, when possible, and then the exhaust fan. We have a nice big exhaust fan that can suck air up to get it maximize airflow as much as possible. And again, that's with weather permitting. Busing. So this proposal right now is that district bus drivers will wear a mask when unloading and loading, but at this point are not required to do so when driving down the road. It's going to be tough with teams because, most of the time when we take a team, it's bigger than a route that we run. So there's more kids kind of packed in there. But at this point, athletes and coaches would sit socially as spread out as possible. And then families, we would ask to sit together. So, and then when it's not possible to be socially distanced, bus athletes and coaches will be asked to wear masks. Again, as far as there's that idea that maybe these kids are already exposed to each other, but bus riding just in general, and I think you'll see it in the bigger plan, is a fairly high risk activity, especially with the windows closed, because that is a common set of air that's being breathed by everybody at the same time for an extended period of time. And other than Highland, everything's more than 15 minutes. So, so that would be for athletes, coaches, and drivers riding in the vans as well, that they would be required to wear masks. Coaches are asked to wear masks whenever it is not possible to socially distance themselves from the athletes. I don't think this is going to be a football problem. Obviously, they're outside and lots of space, more likely to be a volleyball thing. And it should be done at both practices and games. And then coaches will also keep accurate records of each athlete's stats or vitals prior to the start of practice or a game. So they will have a screening process as well. We've purchased even more thermometers to kind of keep track of temperature. Athletes should have a mask available when asked to do so. And then they will also provide their own water bottles and towels. And then they should also change clothes daily. And if an athlete is feeling ill or has a fever, they are not allowed to participate, and that can be communicated with coaches. Coaches should not be punishing kids for missing. So, and then also in here, I don't have to go into all the details, but cross country has a couple of specific things. We are going to be hosting or traveling to smaller meets. There'll be varsity level meets, JV and junior high. In the past, we would just throw all of those kids in the same bus and have them all run together at the same meets. But this will be a smaller setting. Right now, there are not that many meets out there at all. And I don't know what schools are going to be willing to even do it, but we'll see. There's a couple. As far as football, coach and players should wear a mask when they're unable to socially distance. This doesn't have to do with when they're actually actively playing, like I said, but we've looked into and are purchasing shields for their football helmets, cough shields, so there'd be a plastic bar that goes right in front of their face. They've also made some adjustments with non-coaching personnel, photographer, and media. Chain Gang is going to move to the home team side to kind of reduce that cross-contamination from communities. And then some different methods for starting lineups. Volleyball has these special ones. We already talked about the masks. Athletes seated on the bench will wear masks, and the coaches will wear masks, and as well as additional personnel. And then they're getting rid of the handshake before the game. And the teams are not going to switch sides as well. They'll just play on one side. Here's the last piece is the COVID case response. I know that the White Pine League has worked hard to kind of come up with a way to handle a COVID case, but the truth is, and I think you'll see it in the education plan too, is that if a player or a coach tests positive on a team, the public health district, because they're not wearing masks when they're competing, is going to ask for the entire team to be quarantined or self-isolate for 14 days. That is their recommendation. And they've had some discussion, Callie, you might add too, but basically they haven't wavered on that. That's what the public health district believes is the best practice without wearing masks during the competition. So attendees of any event in which it was believed a student was tested positive will be notified. So we will do that via the school Facebook page. That would be the route that we do that. Those people may not be asked to quarantine or self-isolate, but they should be made aware in case symptoms crop up. And then the district will follow the overall public health district plan for positive testing. And athletic director, that would be Callie, would take any appropriate measures to notify other schools that could have come into contact. And I know that the other schools are doing the same thing. Athletes or coaches that test positive can either, and this actually needs to be edited, I missed it when I was looking through it, but if you test positive, there is a quarantine period where you do not have to retest. So a positive test would mean that you have, it's complicated, but 10 days from the time when symptoms occurred first. And your symptoms have to be improving, and you cannot have a fever for more than the last 24 hours at least. So that's the requirements. It gets a little confusing with the CDC guidelines. There's two things that are happening there. If you are exposed to COVID, a known exposure, that's 15 minutes or more in a space, in an indoor space, breathing the same air with someone who has a positive COVID, and you're not even experiencing any symptoms, they ask you to isolate for 14 days because they want 14 days from the exposure, because that virus has to have some time to grow and develop. If you just get a test and it's positive right away, then you have to quarantine for 10 days from the beginning of symptoms. And so there's these two different dates, and in some ways it seems like, well, it's easier if you test, it's shorter if you test positive. But some of that is because of the growth, the time that a virus would need to grow inside someone's body. So, Callie, did you have anything else you want to add to that?
I don't know if you put it in there, Sean, but the recommendation from the Idaho Activities Board and from the Health Department too is that a student athlete that is positive has to have a physician's release before returning.
Okay. Yep.
Whether they get tested again and they're actually negative, or the doctor agrees that they are clear and just signs them out.
That makes
They need
sense.
the doctors know, the same way we would for a concussion.
Yep.
So.
And I think that's probably a good practice for multiple reasons. One, COVID is proving to be more than just a respiratory virus. It's also, a cardiovascular virus, and they're finding it in weird places. And so there's certainly chances that there's other tissues that are struggling with it. So the doctors know it's a good idea. Thanks for that, Kelly. Anything else from the White Pine Lake standpoint, or anything else?
No, I think we pretty much align with what we decided as a league, other than we, recommended that we require masks within the gym. So, like I said before, it was Genesee and us at this point.
Any other schools? I know Orfino's still having some conversations about how to move forward at all with the season.
So they are moving forward.
Okay. Yeah.
They are very leery about contact sports, so they're really concerned about football right now. Timberline has a family that has a COVID positive person, and they have a cross country runner and a football player, and the boys were floating with pretty much every other kid in high school. So she was talking to the health department today, Corey was, and was going to get back to the league with what they're recommending for her to do. Lapway has delayed the start. They didn't start practicing today. They're not going to start practicing until Thursday potentially, because they've had such a rise.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everybody's just a day to day, and I think that's where we will be too. So.
I really do. I mean, that's a good point. This all is just kind of day to day, and one case can set you back for 2 weeks.
Well, I'm curious. So, player or coach test positive, they quarantine 14 days. How does that work with? So they test positive on a Wednesday, but they just had a game on Friday. Does that go back to the team they played on Friday?
I think that would
Or I guess they find out about their test Wednesday.
Right. So we would probably do anything within a 7 to 10 day span. We would
Back it up 7 to 10 days.
Yeah, and we're gonna.
Part of the problem with volleyball is you might have 3 games, 3 teams that you're exposed to, and then you test
they
positive
fall
on Monday.
trigger. And one case could, in essence, what I'm seeing here, shut down an entire league.
It could very rapidly, and that's why I think some of these colleges are dropping off. But it kind of does depend, because that would be a call to the public health district and ask the public health district, because they have better data about, okay, when did the symptoms arise? Well, maybe if, and there's that general 7 to 10 days, but they might feel that if a case of symptoms came on, say, a Wednesday or a Thursday, maybe you don't have to go back to that Friday. Maybe that wasn't the point of transmission, but we should still notify that school that we now have a positive. Or maybe, maybe they'll say, well, you do need to go back, and they need to quarantine too. It just depends. I mean, it's a reminder for our kids, and hopefully for our community too, that the more we can do to kind of keep the spread around here low, the better chance we have of still playing sports. I don't think an exposure, a kid testing positive and people sitting in the stands with masks, or people watching a football game outside on the sidelines, those people aren't going to be considered exposed. It would just be people that are close.
What about, say, a parent or a sibling of a player getting COVID? How does that, any idea what those recommendations are yet?
At this point, that would be between the public health district and that family. I mean, perhaps, I don't know if the ADs have talked about that at all. It would seem wise to me rather than potentially sacrificing a whole team's opportunity to play sports, that student would, being at an increased risk, would kind of remove themselves from practicing for a while.
That's
isn't,
what Timberline is doing with that family. They're not at the moment. I mean, like I said, she was contacting the public health today, so this may have changed. But her plan was to not allow those two boys for sure. Because I don't know if it's mom or dad.
They haven't. The
They
boys
haven't
haven't.
tested positive.
Okay.
It's mom or dad that tested positive. So, but they were not going to allow those boys to practice until they had at least the recommendation from the health district whether or not that would be allowed. So I'm assuming that the health district would want the boys to quarantine for a while too, but I'm not a doctor.
I said that question kind of even rolls over into normal school activities.
Yeah.
How does that?
I think your general recommendation from the health district is if a person in your household is tested positive, then everybody needs to be isolating themselves from the community as a whole. And that would mean providing online educational services and not playing in sports until they're cleared again.
So, I mean, we're talking league, but I know in our last meeting, we talked about, a modified, so, I mean, when does that conversation happen? I mean, if
So-
this implodes?
Yeah,
Is
when
that
it,
it? Is that
basically.
when-
I mean, the IHSA had their meeting, and I think there's a lot of people all around the state that want to see kids play sports. And so the IHSA went forward and said, we're going to play sports. We're going to give this a try. It really feels like that to me. And maybe it won't, hopefully it won't be us, but it feels like, a case is going to domino. And then I think we have those other conversations about what else can we do besides just a regular season. I know they're still discussing state and district stuff, right, Kelly? I mean, that's all still on the table, whether or not that will even happen. There's no assumption that it will.
We
think
changed the format of our volleyball districts
Yeah.
in preparation that we will actually get to have districts.
Right.
So we won't be at LC, so there won't be huge crowds, there won't be intermingling. They will be hosted at one school and there will only be 2 teams in the gym at the time, so.
I don't know. And the IHSA elected not to defer the season. There was some talk from Orfino. That's the only one that I had heard about them just kind of, being proactive and saying no season. But no other school has done that at this point.
I will say we have successfully had volleyball, boys basketball, and girls basketball open gyms for the last 6 weeks. The kids are great. They walk in the door, they go straight to a coach, they get their forehead scanned for temperature, they answer questions about symptoms. They have all been bringing their own water bottle. I mean, they want this. Volleyball especially, I know that they've like, okay, it's 7:30, get out of here. And the girls are like, can you stay longer? They want to play. So.
I think we should probably, just getting that, I think that's a good idea, Quinn. I think that if anything, this plan needs some more clarification about when a kid might not be allowed to practice, which is something I can look at amending and bringing back to the board. What that rule is.
We just have to have it in place before August 27th, Sean.
Yeah, okay. I think we could still, if the board decides, we could approve this document and then amend it later.
I'm sure this will be a very fluid document for season.
Are there other questions? Anybody have questions about the plan that we've been presented here? More questions? I've got just a couple. On the first page, I think right in the first paragraph, there's a line that says masks aren't required outdoors at this time. That probably means should be indoors, or it's backwards anyway. That first paragraph.
On the very first page?
Yeah.
Oh, for fans?
Yeah, under fans. It says, It says, while masks are only encouraged at outdoor events at the moment, this could change as the situation develops. Oh, I see what it means. We're
Yes.
going to still encourage them, but not require them. Okay, that makes sense.
At outdoor events, that is
Yes,
correct.
at outdoor events. So I had a question about locker rooms. It says about, it doesn't say anything about wearing masks in locker rooms, and I wondered about that.
So I think that would fall into there is some language in there about how, like football coaches are encouraged to have their half times or whatever in areas or pregame in areas where social distancing can be maintained. I think a locker room would fall into that category for coaches and for players, that is not a space where social distancing can be maintained with the team. And so barring, activities like finishing, catching your breath or getting a drink, that masks would be required in those locker rooms as well.
Okay.
And if you feel like it should be worded very specifically, it does say when appropriate, halftime conversation should happen in a more open environment. If not possible, athletes and coaches should wear masks. But we could perhaps add in a statement there that, when in locker rooms with multiple people, masks should be worn.
I think if we don't, they won't be worn.
Okay.
They'll say, well, we're social distancing, but they won't be. They'll be hanging out. So.
Masks. So it could just masks are required to be worn in locker rooms.
I don't know. I think it might be wise. What's the rest of the board think?
I think it's implied through everything that it should be, but yeah, putting it in wording so they just know.
Back to what the ban paragraph. Are
Yep.
you saying that fans will be required to wear masks? But this at the top, that first paragraph just says for fans. It just says when attending sporting events, if you cannot safely physically distance, you are encouraged to wear masks. It doesn't specify inside or outside.
Right. So that guidance, that general athletic guidance, we should probably just take it out because if the board approves to wear masks at inside events, that is the general White Pine League guidance, and that's why we kind of left it there. Is like this is what the general statement from the White Pine League is, but it does probably add to some confusion. Because then it goes on to say individual schools may require the wearing of masks for their sporting events. And then that we'll work together with them. I certainly think we could strike that language that says, we can keep in, if you cannot safely physically distance, you are strongly encouraged to please wear a mask. That's fine. That's just a general statement. But we could take out that last line, while masks are only encouraged at outdoor events. No, that's not what we want to take out. We could take out the individual schools may require wearing of masks for their sporting events. Or maybe just change it to other schools so that we're clear that that's, I think the purpose behind that was like you might be able to go, we might have fans that are able to go to Kendrick, obviously, and Kendrick's not going to require masks. And I'm not going to police whether or not our fans are wearing masks at Kendrick's gym. That's up to them and their community and what they decide to do. So it could say something like other schools may require wearing a mask for their sporting events, given different health requirements. That makes parents aware of it.
I think this was our guideline,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
so I think we need to just be really specific about what we are requiring. And then you can put in that.
Later.
Or that, like a note at the end, like other schools may have different policies.
Yeah.
I don't know, that might cut down on the confusion.
I think it would be good to cut down on the confusion there. Because it is.
Or like with the, I mean, like through the guidance of the White Pine League, we could, but these are our rules.
I think there's enough there in that. I mean, I think we could just move it separately. So we could put these sport-specific guidelines up front, the COVID case response up front, and then leave this as a White Pine League general recommendations as something separate, so that it's not the very first thing that people see when they read
Is
it.
Tennessee requiring at football games everything?
Not outside.
Not outdoor.
No.
It's just once you step in there.
So that's just kind of confusing. That well, this sport we're going to require it, this sport we're not.
Yeah. There is a difference safety-wise in being outside and in being inside a building, but it adds to the confusion.
If okay, then any other questions? If we approve this, especially the indoor requirement for masks, I think Mr. Teagues, your suggestion that if we don't do that, if we don't follow the rules, then we'll have no spectators, only players. I think that's something to emphasize, that this is a team effort. The fans are part of the team, and that as a team effort, we all need to wear masks if we're going to be inside, if that's what we're going to commit to. I only say this because we just recently had the horse show, and it just struck me, the 4-H horse show a couple weeks ago, and it just struck me how easy it is to just go back to how we've always done it, It's just crazy easy. And this is going to be kind of hard for people. So I think if we do pass this, kind of sorry about that background noise, having a commitment, sharing a commitment with people of our district that we're kind of in this together, and that's why we're doing this, to preserve the kids' ability to play sports as long as possible.
Good. Yeah, I think, that from the district communications end can occur. And I know that Callie is attending every single parent meeting. That doesn't cover every single fan, but with those exact words that you said, that this really is a team thing, and it's going to be important that we do these things to keep kids playing.
Okay, any other questions or suggestions or comments? So on the timeline of this, do we need this tonight, or do we need this?
So we need an approved plan by August 27th, or we wouldn't meet again in a regular meeting until September. So if we could certainly plan for a special meeting again in 2 weeks, which would be a week before school starts. There might be other things to talk about then, and approve the plan at that point on the 24th. Or we could, I think there would be an option to, tentatively approve, perhaps with moving our specific guidelines to the front of the document, and then, seeking some fixing of the wording for the general guidelines afterward. Yeah. So I think either one of those options would be okay, either not approving it and having a special meeting, or tentatively approving it with those small changes, and then probably more like, we still might end up having a special meeting in 2 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it might be good if we can come up with something tonight, so that coaches have guidelines for the next couple weeks of practice.
That is helpful.
And I have a question along that line. So have you, Mr. Teagues, or Callie, talked to the Craigmont about their guidelines, since we're in the co-op with Craigmont Highland High School?
Yeah, Dennis and I have worked together on it, Ken, and we're in agreement. We met with Monty. We had a parent meeting on Friday night for football, and we've met with the junior high coach as well. And everybody's in agreement of what it needs to look like to keep the kids safe.
Great, that's good. Well, if there's no further discussion, we can either consider this for a couple weeks and have a special meeting. We can entertain a motion to pass it with the changes we've suggested tonight. However, or we do need to get this in place but by the end of August. So the pleasure of the board.
I move to approve the athletic protocols as a temporary measure until later.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion or the policy? Then if there's none, we'll vote. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you for all your work, Mrs. Center, on this and Mr. Teague. So we really appreciate it. I think hopefully everyone will understand and we'll be able to work together on this. Okay, the next item.
Thanks, Kelly.
So the next item I can talk is just a suspension of the attendance final policies that we worked on 35th.
Okay.
And my recommendation is that specific policy, it only deals with secondary students, that we'd keep the policy in place, but that the board would take action to just suspend it for a calendar year. So until August 10th, 2021. As far as reasoning, I think the last thing we want to do with attendance finals, and there's other policies later on that talk about attendance. The last thing we want to do with attendance is make kids feel like they have to come to school if they're not feeling well this year. And so, and I believe that this policy does that to some degree.
Okay, any questions about that? Entertain a motion to.
My question on that, Sean.
Yeah.
Has to do with, and I'm not sure, is there not special awards for perfect attendance for the entire 12 years of school?
Yeah, there are
scholarships or any of that?
not necessarily scholarships. There are awards for attendance. And Jackie and I have had conversations. A lot of it's not in policy, so it doesn't say, like we shall award such and such. So it's more kind of just administratively that, Jackie as principal can reward attendance. Our thought is that, we're going to have this moving definition of attendance. And so that for purposes of like a pencil or a plaque or something like that, that we could still reward students for showing up, whether it would be online. Maybe they have to quarantine for 14 days, but we count those 14 days as an attendance. And coming up with just kind of some reasonable ways to still try and get kids to show up every day. But this one in particular, this kind of 2 days waived. One, if we're in some sort of online format, it gets really murky what even the attendance finals would look like, let alone the fact that it does seem to really encourage high school kids to come potentially sick.
Not so much the younger kids. Did Izzy get a bike?
I don't know.
Yeah.
So we have never had a sixth grader on a bike until this year. That's great.
Perfect attendance.
Perfect
4, 5, and
attendance
6.
for
So
first or sixth grade.
That would be interesting to see what Rogers is doing. Is that who does it? Or is
Yes,
it, yeah,
Rogers does.
who does what they're doing this year as far as this?
I should have asked Kelly. Yeah, I think she did. I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, maybe we'll have to tweak that a little bit so the kids aren't feeling like, almost.
Well, like I said, because of the online, if they log in, they're there.
They're there.
You at least know they're trying.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay. Any other questions about that? We need a motion if we're going to suspend that.
I move to suspend the attendance final policy 3050 for the period of 1 calendar year.
Thank you, Quinn. Do I have a second?
Second.
And that's Polly, second in that.
Yeah.
Any discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All opposed to the motion? Abstaining? Okay, then it passes unanimously. Next up is suspension for open enrollments.
So
we talked a little bit about that earlier. Go ahead, Mr. Teagues.
yep, we have a policy that says for open enrollment for an incoming year that we can require that they submit as early as February and use that as a cutoff date. In practice, we've kind of just, even though we have that potential use, we've kind of let it be a rolling thing with open enrollment. With, talking to other area superintendents as we're all trying to navigate this, the last thing that we need or another district around needs is shifting student bodies based on decisions that boards are making. And so I think both to support our school and where we're at, and then other schools around us that are our neighbors, that we would just close off any open enrollment. So we obviously still accept the ones that the board has approved, but we would close off any future open enrollments for this school year. It's kind of late in the game anyways. And there's, I have concerns about just we have enough technology for our kids, but it is a concern. And just overall, not overwhelming the district and being fair ultimately to the taxpayers that vote for our levy that do live in this district. And so that my recommendation is just that we freeze and do not approve any future open enrollment applications for the 2021 school year.
Now, Sean, open enrollment is they're living outside of district but wanting to come here.
Yes, there is still a possibility, and this has come up with other districts and ours as well, that a child could move in with another family member, an aunt, an uncle, a grandpa, grandma. And in those cases, that would not be open enrollment if they're laying their head at night in our district. And I've visited with, the State Department of Education and other superintendents about this. And basically, if they're in our district, then we were obligated to provide them with an education. So that's not those cases, but they would have to have a physical address, and we can, in those cases, if we choose to. I don't even know that I would say we would at this point, but we could make them pursue some legal guardianship, even temporary, for the ease of our district, so that we could manage some of those things with, if someone needed permission or if an emergency happened, who do we contact? Those things get complicated, but so we could require, from the guidance that I've got, we could require them to get a temporary legal guardianship of those children. But that is a different situation than an open enrollment where a family stays living in Orfino's district and wants to send their kids here.
Do we have any pending requests for open enrollment?
I don't have any pending. Yeah, we've had some inquiries, but no formal applications are pending.
Okay.
And at this point, we weren't blocking anything, so we provided them access to applications.
Well, I think given the time of year, it seems pretty reasonable at this point. How's the board feel? Do we go ahead with this?
I think so.
Okay, we'll need a motion then to.
I'll move to approve that we suspend approvals of any new open enrollment applications for the 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you. Okay, Sandy seconded that. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. Is anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Then it's unanimous. Next up is thank you very much, everyone. Next up is our spring policy updates, the second reading, and you've got Mr. Teague sent out a document. Is that the document you sent out, or is that the first reading ones?
I sent out the first reading ones.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Last month there was these ones.
Yeah.
I don't have a whole lot to add and I went into quite a bit of detail, I think, last month. We walked through every policy. I don't remember any questions or didn't have any notes of any specific questions. I don't need to take up a bunch of time talking about them unless somebody read one that they have some concerns about.
Okay. Thank you.
These are not COVID related ones. They were just kind of the standard quarterly update from ISBA.
Right. Does anyone have any, this is the second reading on these policies. Anyone have any questions? We went through those pretty carefully last time. Okay, if not, can we entertain a motion for approving the policy updates?
I would just refer to them because the way it's worded in the agenda, if you said spring policy updates.
Okay, spring policy updates.
I move to approve the spring policy updates.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Quinn. And any discussion on the motion? If not, we'll vote. All opposed, say sign. All anybody abstaining, then it's approved unanimously. Okay, now we're to the first kind of readings.
Yeah.
COVID updates.
So the ISBA on Friday pushed out some policies, a big mass of policies, which made my weekend fun. There's two that we're going to kind of be talking about just to keep them separate, and they're separate agenda items for board consideration. I left, as far as the agenda is concerned, it says that there's possibly a first reading for sure, and possibly a second reading. As you know, in our policy, and is legal, a board can, in a single board meeting, read once, read twice, and pass a policy. That is not, even though it's legal, is not a generally accepted best practice, except for perhaps in emergency situations, because it does, the protection of reading these things twice is that it does give the community and you guys a chance to kind of, catch things that you wouldn't want in policy, or make amendments to it. With that said, I left these as, I hadn't read through them when we were trying to amend the agenda, so I didn't know what was going to fall into the, like, we need to get this approved before school starts and what doesn't. But there's some more clarity now. So they're two separate items. I'll go through the C section first. What will happen with these policies if they're approved is that these will kind of go in their own folder. And this is the ISBA language. These are emergency series of policies specifically around the COVID-19 pandemic. These versions line up with numbers that we already have in our policy. And they wouldn't become part of this policy, but they would supersede that number during, as long as there is a health emergency in place. And then when the health emergency is lifted, then all of these C's policies, because we're just keeping them in a separate folder, would be gone. And we would revert back to our original policies. So with that said, there's a list of the C's. So 1400C is the first one. This has to do with policy 1400 encourages board members to, participate in the school and potentially watch classes in person, be at the school in person. And this adds a section that basically says board members could also participate in, or encouraged to participate in virtual or online classrooms. In this policy, it's very careful to say that board members are not there for evaluative purposes or anything else like that, but that they, in order to see how the school operates, it's good for them to be involved. So this just 1400C would only open up the possibility of board members participating in these online classrooms if we happen to have that. 1620C is the board's goals and objectives. And, the board every year lays out goals and objectives, whether it's by themselves, that's something we've talked about before, or whether it's through the continuous improvement plan. But this has specific language that encourages the board to set their goals and objectives based on the current COVID-19 pandemic. So it's recommendation to adopt goals addressing these challenges specifically. 1700C, this policy outlines the applicability of the emergency C policy series. So this is the one that basically says all this stuff in this C section will kind of temporarily go over the top of the existing policies. 1701C, and this is a good conversation one. So the first three I recommend adoption for. This policy would allow the board to delegate authority to the superintendent in the event I must take a measure in order to protect public health and safety of students. The superintendent will need to convene the board or to ratify or overturn the decision. So an example of that might be me as a superintendent, and this is where the board needs to feel comfortable with it. If, mask wearing is becoming a real issue at a sporting event, that I could, without official board approval, make that adjustment and say, we're not going to allow fans. I hope I never have to do that one. But that decision would be subject to board approval at either a special or a regular board meeting. So you wouldn't have to wait for a regular. Could also be done at an emergency board meeting. So the language I'm recommending is that in the event that the superintendent must take measures to protect the health and safety of students, staff, and community members, action may be taken without immediate board approval in order to kind of ease the board's concerns so that I'm not acting as just a unchecked dictator. Board members must be notified of any such action within 24 hours. So that would be via email or text. And then the action must be either ratified or overturned at the next regular emergency or special board meeting. So the board could also get together and want to have an emergency or a special board meeting specifically if it was felt that was needed. Or they could just, if the board members felt generally okay about it, or maybe the timeline was that there was a regular board meeting coming, that it could just be done then. So that's a little different than the two languages. I'm actually, because of the short timeline, I reached out to April Hoy, who I'm working with on the other policy stuff, to have her review that language. I have not heard back from her. Obviously, it was the weekend and then today. So I haven't heard back from her on that language, but that would be my recommended language without pending her confirmation. 2110C, the district and schools should be prepared to shift to online learning. Recommend adoption on that. 2100 is this update states that any remote learning program should follow the development and adoption process outlined in the remainder of the policy. So this is kind of a curriculum adoption policy where the board is responsible for reviewing curriculum and approving it. And so any curriculum that would be used just for remote learning would fall under that category as well. 2150, so I recommend adoption of 2100. 2150 and 2150P is just our protection against unauthorized copying or use of audio or other materials. And then they applied it to both physical and electronic mediums. So that would involve, if it's illegal to copy a certain text 100 times, then it would also be illegal to scan it and send it out to students. 2210P1 is a procedure. It updates and clarifies the procedure that this is for weather-related school closures only. Right now, that's the only, it's labeled, it really is just in the title, it's labeled as school closures. But because of other school closures, now 2210P1 would just be for weather-related school closures. 4105, 4105F is some board stuff. Now that remote meetings are likely to become every day, digital testimony should be provided to the clerk. So this is that people can submit written testimony without being in person. And that testimony prior to a board meeting, that testimony would be provided to Marcy, our clerk, by Friday at noon. And then what she would do, she wouldn't read all this written testimony, but at the board meeting, when it came time for public testimony, she would print out and hand to the board or share with the board via the packet also this public testimony. So it would be another way of testifying to the board that wouldn't require someone having a Zoom or YouTube. They could simply type an email or mail their written testimony, and it would be shared as an official part of the board document. It does include some protection that, you know, they have to leave their name, their address, all of that information in order for it to be considered official public testimony. And then the 4105F is the form that's associated with that. 4210 and that whole series. My recommendation is that we still have our facilities open for community events, but the important thing to recognize is that those community events would have to fall under our guidelines, the school health guidelines, the public health guidelines, also state and federal guidelines. And that uses the word guidelines. So while, you know, the CDC recommended guidelines and said schools don't necessarily have to follow them 100%, this would be that outside groups would have to follow those guidelines. So they wouldn't have as much flexibility. That might mean things like, I mean, real life examples for us might be if 4-H uses our facilities, or we still allow the police officers to come in and use our weight room. Then those types of things would be that we would still allow it as long as they're following our protocols that we prescribe. 4225 is just when I don't expect us to do this. We don't do it very often. Football is the only example that I can think of for sports. But if equipment is checked out, our district-owned equipment, it must be thoroughly cleaned and disinfected after use. 5480 is the leadership premium. So I am not recommending adoption on this. In our negotiated agreement this year, the district laid out funds to pay for this leadership premium. And my recommendation is that we just keep that language. In future years, if the state continues to not fund it, then I think we could strip that language out. But for now, I don't recommend adoption of that. 8170 is an update that requires district vehicles to be cleaned and sanitized according to our district protocols for doing so. Those protocols are in our plan, and Tim would be responsible for implementing those. So I recommend adoption there. 2210 P2C. Awesome. This policy outlines a proper procedure for the superintendent to close a school. Oh, whoops. Am I repeating myself? Just want to make sure I'm not. Yeah, almost.
Okay, like jumped back up to the
Yeah, how do I
top.
do that?
It's like a scavenger hunt.
I don't know. Oh, I you know what I did is I copied and pasted there. So this is their order that's or I probably started on the wrong page. But anyways, so 2210 P2C is the policy that outlines a proper procedure for the superintendent to close school in the event of a health emergency. So I recommend adoption of this with the following additions. So the addition that I have in there is that 14 days of closure prior to board approval. So that kind of sets up the maximum. Now these would be calendar days. The maximum number of days that it could be closed prior to the board convening and declaring the school closed. Those would they would be online learning days according to our plan. And if you guys feel comfortable with it, those number of days could be set however you feel comfortable. So if the board wanted to look at maybe a shorter period of time, I would be open to that. But so up to 14 days before board approval. And then any closure that lasted more than 14 days, the board would have to formally make a decision to reconvene school.
But even at this 14, that's just the maximum. You can close it
Yeah.
without our approval.
So in a public health
So
emergency,
it could
I
be
say
3 days later, we have a board
Right.
meeting and say, close it or open,
Yes,
open it back.
absolutely. Yeah, but if it goes longer than 14 days, the board would need to convene to make a bigger decision than the 14 days. Again, that 14 days is totally arbitrary and is certainly open to discussion from the board. I feel like it gives some flexibility to make kind of quick without, and I have a feeling we're going to be meeting for lots of board meetings throughout the year. And so this is just one more. If you guys are comfortable with 14 days, I'm comfortable with it too.
Is that 14 school days or 14 calendar days?
14 calendar days, so 2 weeks.
Okay.
2315C reflects the additional health and safety measures regarding to physical education. I didn't see anything there that concerned me. So I recommend adoption. 2370 is a policy that delegates authority to the superintendent or designated staff to create plans for remote learning for homebound students. That work is already going on and will continuously be brought to the board as far as what the operations plan is for remote learning. The first part of our work has been on how to keep schools open, and then we have a subgroup that is we meet again tomorrow that is meeting on what to do if schools close, and so that plan will just continue to be developed, and it'll likely change throughout the year. 2440 is just an update to IDLA, specifically around IDLA being available to elementary grade levels. We've had several parents interested in that, and I'll talk about that a little in the plan. But with IDLA in the elementary, there are some advantages that we still receive funding for those students, but we also have to continue to provide other services like technology and potentially special education services. But we have, we got in relatively early, and we have 10 slots that are up to 10 slots that are reserved for elementary students if they elect to just do IDLA. 2720 is a graduation one. I hope we never get to this. Probably not an emergency to update right now, but 2720C is just that basically in the event that an in-person graduation is not deemed safe, it encourages staff to use innovative approaches to hold the ceremony. We've already done that. 3050C, this policy authorizes the superintendent or a designee to set an attendance policy that best fits the needs of the district's level of operations and emphasizes a forgiving approach to absences. So our goal is to count kids in attendance as much as possible as long as they're participating and attending the online meeting times. 3255C is a policy that includes the recommendation that schools and districts require or strongly encourage the use of masks or other appropriate face coverings. The policy that ISBA had kind of either seemed to be one or the other. And I would say, like, when we get to our plan, it's more hybrid. And so I changed the language from their two options to the following. Students are encouraged and may be required to carry and or wear a mask or other appropriate face covering that shield the mouth and nose to protect themselves, their peers, and district staff while present in any school buildings. The determination of whether or not masks are encouraged or required will depend on the category the school is placed in the reopening and school operations plan, which we'll review later tonight. The district shall provide face coverings to students. We've ordered some. The state is providing some that should be on their way. We will order more. The teachers have made face masks, one for every student already. And expects that face coverings be washed daily to ensure maximum protection. The board's decision to require and provide face coverings is based on a review, and the rest of that language was standard in theirs. So it gives us a little bit of flexibility because it seemed like the ISBA only had either we just recommend them or we're requiring them. And this kind of meets our plan a little bit better. So recommend adoption with that language. 3500C, districts and schools will need to encourage and reinforce healthy hand behavior. So that's that policy. I recommend adoption. 3520C, I recommend adoption of with optional language requiring a student to stay home if so ordered by the health district. And then also would include option 1 in that. So that that policy is just that it was a little bit loose on whether or not they would be required, but my thought is as a board that we would want language that says if a public health district is telling you to stay home and quarantine as a student or self-isolate, then we should 100% support that and require it and not allow a student to be on our campus if the health district is telling them that they shouldn't be. 4140C is about non-school meetings held on district property. Suggests that all visitors receive approval prior to any meeting. That's part of our plan, is that visitors would receive approval to be on school grounds, administrative approval. And so I recommend adoption of that with the optional language that was included. 5210C is the C-Series policy that notes that some staff might be working remotely. My recommendation there is to adopt without the optional language that they have listed. 5212C is a new policy and outlines the administrative process for employees to telework during the pandemic. So it has some information about how that would be approved by an administrator if telework was an option. Our plan, our operations manual has that. And even perhaps, you know, as we progress through the stages, staff who aren't required, whose their job duties don't require them to be here every day, could potentially be working from home. 5235C is a policy that outlines the guidance from the CDC and local health officials about symptoms of illness and how they should vacate the area of the school. This is specifically around staff. It also aligns with our operations plan, so I recommend adoption. 5400C is some updates to the emergency paid sick leave under the Family Medical Leave Act and the Families First Coronavirus Act. And then it also includes the process for the sick leave bank, which is in our negotiated agreement. So I recommend that we adopt with option 1, and then also with optional language delegating the authority to the superintendent. That's in there already. I think that is it. Oh, there's a few more. Sorry.
Yeah.
5600C is like 3520C. This policy provides for daily health screenings of staff. And so I recommend adoption with the optional language that they have listed there. 5610C is the same healthy hand behavior required of students, and also outlines recommendations for districts and schools to encourage masks or other appropriate facial coverings. So this is probably more around staff, but the optional language that I'm recommending is that staff are encouraged and may be required to carry and or wear a mask or other appropriate face covering that shield the mouth and nose to protect themselves. The determination of whether or not masks are encouraged or required will depend on the category the school is placed in the reopening and school operation plan. The district shall provide face coverings to staff, that's a typo, staff, and expects that face coverings be washed daily. The board's decision to require and provide face coverings is based on a review of the best practices. So that is kind of like what we talked about with the students, but with staff. And then 8103C is reflects changes issued by the State Board of Education about transportation expenses and which ones are reimbursable during the pandemic. So it's just a temporary update of that. And that guidance has come out from the State Board of Education. 8120C and 8140C are an outline of the physical distancing and safety protocols when riding a bus. And we'll talk about that in our operations plan as well. And then 8240C is a policy outline suggested steps for serving school meals, which again is in our operations plan. And then 9405C is a policy that outlines the requirement with all students, staff, and visitors to practice social distancing. And so again, it seemed like in this policy, it was kind of like either really super tight, like just saying social distancing had to always be maintained, or to the extent possible with a whole bunch of other things. So rather than going with one or the other, I think we take that first option and just add the language to the extent possible. So just to say, we're going to make the best effort that we can while recognizing it's not going to be perfect to keep 6 feet. I don't know what district in the world would be able to stand up and say that they're going to keep 6 feet of distance from their kids all of the time as a matter of policy. That seems like an impossibility.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's, oh, am I muted?
No.
You're okay. We can hear you.
Okay. This toggling between screens just drives me crazy. So let's consider the C updates first, since they're a little different class of policy updates. And do we have questions or changes or comments? And now, just for clarification, I think that we were not required to even have a second reading. It's just, if we want to pass these on the first reading, we can. We normally have a second reading as a courtesy or actually an informational thing for everyone to have time to review them. But in this case, since they're part of, actually most of them, many of them were part of our plan we're going to be working on next. So it's a pleasure of the board. But if you have questions or comments about these, now would be the time to do those. Or we can, another way we could do this is we could go ahead, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, but we could go ahead and consider this a first reading and then have a special meeting for the second reading and adoption? Or do we have time for that on these C ones?
I think we have time for that. My recommendation, if we wanted to do that, I think these should be in place again prior to students coming into the building. So we would probably want to have a special meeting to do that.
Okay.
Now, these policies updates here, these are all, in essence, meant to be temporary. They're related to COVID or any pandemic.
Correct. Everything with the C at the end. So I really confuse things because I read my pages out of order. But the ones on the first part of my document that I sent with you, it's about a page and just a little more. Those are the summer updates that do include some COVID, but also they're listing as like these would be permanent, just a fix that when COVID goes away, we would still recommend them being a part of the policy. Everything else, all of the ones that end in C, so the next 4 pages, would be in place. We save them just in a folder by themselves. They would override the number that they currently have. And then when the health emergency is removed, they would disappear.
Who decides on that health emergency, or would we be better to just approve them for a calendar year and then wait and redo it?
Subject to review. Yeah. I think you could approve them for a calendar year because then you could come back. And even if, let's say, the pandemic breaks and something, a vaccine or whatever else happens, and they decide it's not an emergency anymore, then you could come back. Even if you had approved them for a year, you could certainly come back in February and revoke them. I think that would be a reasonable thing to do.
Any other comments or? I think it's appropriate to act on the C's separate from the other ones. No
Yeah.
problem reading those in whatever order. We're quick studies. We caught up with you. But so let's. I think the C's, if everyone's comfortable with them, we could maybe consider them tonight for passing them. But if you'd rather have a special meeting and take some time with them, that's fine as well. Would we have to have the summer policy updates? We don't need those tonight. So
I don't, several of them have COVID related things, but I don't see anything in there that would be like what I would call like absolutely essential to have in place without, I think those could all be given a second reading next month. And really even some of the C's potentially, but there are some, some of the delegating of authority in the case of a closure. And that maybe, I think since the C's are temporary in nature, that I would recommend putting them in place. And then, certainly even next month, if you continue to read, even if you do this first and second reading, it does not mean that we can't put one of these back on the docket.
Sure.
Evaluate it.
Yeah.
Like I said, a lot of them are
Right.
anyways. So.
Okay, I will move to approve the C series policy updates for up to 1 calendar year.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Sandy. Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, then we'll vote. All in favor of the motion? Oh, no. Anybody opposed to the motion? Anybody abstaining? Then it's unanimous on the motion. I think if we could consider the regular summer policy updates for second reading at our next meeting, then, unless someone would like to make a motion otherwise. Okay, hearing none, then let's go on to back to revisit our school opening and operation plan.
So Ken, at the will of the board here, Tim is here to talk a little bit about bus routes. Are you okay if we do the bus route discussion? And then
Sure, I can't really see who's there.
Yeah,
so
it's hard.
Thanks for letting me know that.
He's glaring.
Let's move on.
No.
That's fine. Thank you, Tim, for being patient. And could you talk to us about our bus routes?
You can stand wherever you want. If you want to stand there, that'll be good. Good job, Tim.
Even if you sit at that table.
Yeah, you can sit at that table.
This one?
Yeah, you can sit there.
There you are.
I got word the other day, we got a run out to Neil Miller's. Neil Miller lives on top of the grade out there right above Orfino.
Yeah.
So we had really big ideas. We were going to get a 4th route together. So the kids didn't have to get on the bus so early. I thought I had a driver lined up to run this 4th route, but I don't anymore. So I don't know what we're going to do. Kids are getting on the bus pretty early. If we run out to Neil Miller's and if Larry does the route that he does out there, those kids are going to have to get on the bus by 6 o'clock.
Holy smokes.
Yuck.
Yeah. Which means they're not getting off till 5 either.
Yeah.
Right. And I just had an idea, and I know some of the other schools do it, and I don't know how it worked. And this is just an idea. If the school could start at 8:30 instead of 8, that would help a bunch. I mean, a bunch. And then, then kids wouldn't have to get on the bus early. If I get Bruce to run part of Larry's route, it's going to be the same thing. The kids are already getting on the bus out at Winona about 20 after 6. Quarter after 6, 20 after 6. Upmore kids get on the bus 20 after 6. Yeah. So, and I haven't had any complaints about, kids getting on the bus early, but I don't think they need to get on that early. I don't know what to do.
So Tim and I have talked, and I didn't know about, we were kind of pursuing that bus driver angle to have 4 routes, and it looks like it doesn't work. I think certainly it wouldn't take board action, but within my authority that we could still continue to advertise
Yes,
for
yeah.
a 4th bus driver position.
I have a sub driver, and we talked it over, and she doesn't want to come in every day and run bus. She still wants to sub, and she said, I'll help you sub it and stuff like that, and that's great, but she didn't think she could make it work to come in here every morning and night and drive bus. So that's kind of why we're down on the other end.
There's other options on the table include, I mean, some districts, especially, like a Mountain View over in Grangeville, sometimes where somebody's really remote, the district can, come up with a contract and agreement to potentially pay a parent some mileage to get their kid to a closer pickup location. We were kind of pursuing this, and now we're gonna have to shift gears a little bit. I didn't even know until right now.
Well, yeah,
but it's okay.
And I didn't find out.
Yeah.
My sub driver didn't want the full-time job. I didn't find out until about 4 o'clock this afternoon. So,
yeah. I mean, I think certainly one thing the board does every year is approve the routes, and part of that is that they have to be approved pickup locations by the board. So in a lot of ways, I mean, I think by approving even this plan that you have right here, that's the list of the kids that will require bus stop. And those will be the approved, pickup and drop off locations.
And what would help a bunch if I knew who was riding and who's not riding. Yeah. I mean, I just found out a little bit ago that the hands aren't riding, right?
Yeah.
So that'll help.
Yeah.
I guess if you guys want, you can look over these routes and you can prove the turnarounds and stuff like that. But I'm not going to have any information on routes till probably first day of school.
I think we're required by law, I think, to approve the turnarounds and everything prior to school. So I think we need to do that. I'm pretty comfortable with some flexibility though, and I'd rather not reschedule school start times at this point, but I think that if we can work something out, like Mr. Teagues was saying, that idea of perhaps meeting them, the more distant ones at the next stop away from them or something like that might be something we could work out too.
Well, and part of that too is there's parents working, and sometimes the parents aren't there to meet the bus when the kids get off. So, yeah. But like Sean said, maybe we can work something out. I don't know. Well, we're going to have to work something out because we got to get the kids to school. So
yeah. I'm a little leery or curious on, with these COVID stuff. How many sub drivers do you have?
One.
So if you lose a driver out for COVID for 2 weeks,
quarantine.
So trying to find a fourth route and still having a sub on top of that's not a bad thing because we might be combining routes before long anyways.
Well, and I can drive routes. It's but things aren't going to get done here in the morning if I'm out driving routes. That's bus breaks.
It's really hard, especially
or if we got to plow snow or
yeah.
A lot of coaches drive bus for sports fit, don't they? Or no? One?
Two. Dave can.
Oh, Dave, yeah.
Are those ones that can fill in as?
We've used Kyle as a bus driver before in a few pinches.
If he's not coaching ball.
Yeah, if he's not coaching.
After school and stuff, but yeah. But I'll work with Sean a little bit, and maybe we can work with some of the parents and see what we can do. I had it all figured out because I just knew I had a fourth bus driver, but it didn't pan out. So,
but perhaps now, I mean, in the past we've advertised some bus drivers as like substitutes. I mean, we may give it another round and see if somebody where it's a more consistent work might be interesting.
Have you done the ad for a full-time bus driver?
In the past, we have not
But not this year.
yet.
Yeah.
but I think we need to advertise for a full-time driver and if we can get a full-time driver, then maybe we can go back to this 4th bus route. But for now, it's not going to work. And I just don't have enough time. I don't know if we have enough time to train the driver before the school starts. So that's the other side of the story. So, unless one of you guys want to drive bus, that'd be wonderful.
Well, we'll get to work on this. My recommendation would be to approve these bus stops on these routes. And then I'll just be in communication. I don't, whatever option it is, whether we can find somebody who maybe already has some CDL certification and could be trained quickly, or maybe we don't. And we have to come up with, a different option as far as maybe parents getting, there's another one that I hadn't talked to you yet about that is potentially not riding for a while. So
yeah. Well, and that would help out a bunch if we knew who was riding. I know we're about 90% know who's riding, but
yeah,
there's a few names on here that we don't know if they're riding.
Thank you, Tim. Tim, is there any of the turnarounds or anything that you want to mention in particular?
No, it's all been good. Most of the stops have been going on for the last 5 or 6 years, and so
Okay.
I think we're good on that. So
All right.
We'll do it that way.
Thank you. Any board members have any questions or comments? I think then let's entertain a motion for the existing routes and turnarounds, and then we can move, as Mr. Teagues and Tim said, they can work together on iron out some of these problems.
I'll move to approve the bus routes and turnarounds.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Okay.
Sandy seconded that. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All opposed?
Yes, I do.
Was that? Anybody abstaining? That wasn't nobody was in opposition, was? I heard something.
Oh, no, it was just an extra conversation. No.
Okay. Okay, then it's passed unanimously. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Quinn was just opposed to driving bus himself.
There you go.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on to then our school reopening plan.
All right, so you guys have all had the draft for a while to kind of look at. I just wanted to highlight a few changes as we continue to meet. And so I start a few things. We've added some definitions. A couple of things. One, when this plan is finalized by the board, I have already sent to the Herald that I'm going to host a series of online teletown halls or whatever you want to call it, starting on Thursday this week. And then also one next Monday and Tuesday, trying to do it at some different times for parents. I realize there's going to be a lot of questions about it. One thing I wanted to have solid before kind of beginning these town halls is that it was, it's board approved. So that kind of takes some of the squishiness out of it as I'm having conversations with parents. We included a lot of parents, a lot of staff members in drafting this plan. And so we've gotten a lot of insight. I realize that, not every parent could participate, but I do believe it's fairly well thought out plan. And then when approved by the board, I can just have those town halls will be a chance for people to just ask questions like, well, what does this look like? What does this mean? And hopefully kind of alleviate some concerns. I've had a lot of good one-on-one conversations with families as they approach me and ask me, and they seem to go well, and people kind of understand where we're at. But this is a little bit more efficient way of maybe doing that. So just be aware of that. I don't think there's any requirement other than if you're a parent for a board member to be there, but I will generate a document that has kind of some frequently asked questions to kind of help people do that. So much is different, and so there's a lot of uncertainty there. And I know people like certainty. So on the front, I did add a little bit of language that just models that policy that was approved in the C, is that the school board, grants the authority for the superintendent to shift categories, which will be subject to review at the next regular board meeting. And then the authority to make changes to the text of this document shall be affirmed or modified or revoked. It'd fall into that same category. If there was a change to this document that was needed for public health purposes, that would be communicated to the board within 24 hours. And then as board members, I want you to feel secure that, if you weren't feeling comfortable with something that I did and wanted the board to look at it, and I would not take offense, and certainly a special meeting could be called to discuss it. You guys have a different function than me. I'm, trying to make that school operate smoothly and have to make decisions, but certainly you guys have that oversight and should know that anything that would happen would be subject to your guys' either approval or revocation. So if you turn to the actual plan, a couple of adjustments as we finalize discussions with both the health district and the parent group. The biggest one probably, and the one that you're most likely to hear about, is I put in bold, but that is a requirement to use masks in specific settings indoor. This is at the green level. So right off the bat, when physical distancing is not possible, and when this mix of cohorts cannot be maintained. So the specific example of that is the hallway passing times in the secondary building. It really seems to me to be a pretty high risk activity. I think there's just natural tendency for high school and junior high students to want to socialize and mix during that time. There's no way to kind of, keep the hallway clear and clean. And there's absolutely no way to maintain the 6 feet of distance. And so my recommendation, and that's all it is at this point, is that we would require masks during those passing periods. We explored kind of doing alternate schedules, but in the end, all the alternate schedules ended up with kids stacking up in one place or another. And so I think it's most efficient and the most effective way to do it is just to require that at the very beginning. That would mean that, it's required for these secondary students especially, but all students is what is in here, that they would have to have a mask on their person at all times. There's a few other examples, and so these are specific ones. Secondary building between class periods, the use of a restroom with a mask, and then these gatherings, like say when the kids, this is probably more secondary, when they're inside a building gathering like after lunch or something like that, that masks would be the expectation. That doesn't mean we're not going to still encourage physical distancing. It just means during these times when it's just really impossible realistically to prevent physical distancing and interaction with other groups. And so that is a step up in the kind of the mask requirement. And I just want to make you guys aware of that on this final document, that would become. Then, in category 2, it gets into a little bit broader language that masks would be required whenever physical distancing isn't possible. So I guess that would draw the line between those two scenarios. So that's a big one. I don't know if you want me to pause for discussion on that. I feel like the committee that we had that discussed it was unanimous in their support for that movement or to that place, but I'll pause for a second.
Okay, anyone have some comment on that? So even though we're strongly encouraging like a 3-layer mask, these neck gaiters and other face coverings are still okay?
Yes, still at this point with public health, that hasn't changed. I did, I monitor all that research, and I saw the most recent one that came out that said maybe perhaps neck gaiters, and it looked to me like they were single layered ones. Did not provide the same level of protection. I kind of think it probably has to do with the total number of layers. But we also, away from the CDC guidance, but with approval from public health, through face shields and face masks into the same category. So that does not follow CDC guidance, but it does, it has been approved by public health. And so also not getting into that, I did, there is some language in the definition about what a mask is. If you go back to the definitions, I got a little nervous. I saw there were a few people online that were coming up with things called like freedom masks or other things which were like mesh. Like you might have a ball bag that's mesh and you make your mask out of that. And they were calling it a mask. So the definition of a mask includes a tightly woven fabric. So again, not getting it, it's going to be awfully hard. You got to think about what's reasonable to enforce. I don't want to be walking around feeling people's masks for whether or not they have 2 or 3 layers or 1. I think we try to educate that the CDC says 3 layers. The masks that we purchased are 3 layers of fabric. The masks that our teachers sewed are 2 layers of fabric. But I still think they're sufficient given the situation that we're in. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the proposed change for masks in passing situations, the halls and such? You know, I think that the kids are overall better adaptable to change than we are thinking about change. And this might not be as big a deal.
It's still going to be hard. I think, Ken, like you said, that, you know, you go to an outside event and it is so tempting. I've felt the same thing at times, even like with a family event or something like that. It's so tempting to just go back to, you know, and it's human nature to do what we've been doing. And so the one thing with masks that I think for me is when we think about enforcing it or asking Jackie or other teachers to enforce it, is that it seems more reasonable to me that a mask could be enforced compared to even physical distancing. It's really hard. I think it will be really hard to implement the physical distancing with real fidelity. I actually think the mask part is going to be easier than that when it's all said and done. Anyways, I don't think that, there's some guidance just that has come out from the health district about screening, but there's no major changes there. We continue to screen. Sanitation is the same. Require water bottle use, that was already in there. Physical distancing protocols are the same. COVID testing remains the same. Instructionally, I'll just pause and talk about our work on online instruction. So we are developing handbooks for both the elementary and the secondary. They're in draft format. I think they got shared out in the board document. Maybe not. I can't. Did they? Yeah. So they're in there. They're in really early draft form as we continue to meet. Like I said, we're meeting again for a couple hours tomorrow to kind of hammer out some more details. That idea would be, the hope is, rather than being in a panic if we have to close school down for a little bit, that we have a relatively seamless transition to online learning, if that's the case. But so we'll continue to work on that. Good feedback from parents about what worked really well and what didn't work and what could be improved. I just kudos again to our staff for last year for the work that they did kind of on the fly, trying to fix an airplane as it was flying. But that is ongoing work and will be shared with the board for final approval in future months, hopefully in September. We added a section on social and emotional health. and Jackie's kind of helped to build that out. One of the biggest stresses that I hear from parents, honestly, in my conversations, is this idea that we could be constantly shifting, between modes. So like, especially I think for elementary kids, but even for high school kids to be like, oh, we're in person today and now we're 2 weeks online and now we're closed but no school. And so, just trying as we navigate these to prepare students for a potential closure, to kind of smooth those bumps out and to continue to provide services kind of throughout is an important piece. Lunch, Marcy and I worked on a couple of pieces that, specifically for what we need to submit to the state, but things such as like contactless pay for those students that are getting lunch. And then curbside, an addition that in yellow that is starting in yellow for students who elect to stay home because of health reasons, that we would continue to provide a free and reduced lunch if they qualify, or really just a school lunch. The other big change, which has to do with masks, is on buses. After more conversations with Carol and then also with the parent and teacher group that met, my recommendation is to require masks on the bus for kids when the masks are recommended for bus drivers. Where's that on there? Require students to wear a mask on the bus when the weather does not allow for the windows to be down. So if the windows have to be up and we can't get circulation, my recommendation is that students are wearing a mask. I think, again, we'll probably get through most of September and October, although it's, it's 6 o'clock in the morning and October is pretty chilly.
Yeah.
But that students would wear a mask. It is just, it's like we talked about with athletics. It's a confined space, shared breathing for, if it's 6:30 until 7:30, that's an hour that student's on the bus, and that masks would be the best practice. I think we'll seat students with their family members, and really at about no more than 10 kids are out, we should be able to space them out enough, but those masks give that extra layer of protection. And then kind of a finalized communication piece from the last time we met, just with a full plan of how it will be communicated and the timelines that we'll follow to share. And then I added, because of the high risk in a music and PE instruction section for your review. This was not on it the last time we talked, but singing is considered to be a high risk of spread. Students who are engaged in singing should maintain a minimum of 12 feet of distance, or they will be required to wear masks. So that's quite a bit, and probably might fall into that mask wearing category because 12 feet is a pretty big circle in any room. And then strongly encourages physical education to take place outside whenever possible. And that consideration should be given to the amount of physical distancing that certain activities require. So that's for teachers to plan. And then that's in green. And then in yellow, students who are engaged in singing would be required to wear masks, regardless of any physical distancing requirements. If they're singing, they're wearing a mask. And then again, PE kind of keeps that same requirement. The idea with PE, the idea of kids running around with masks is really difficult, I think. Masks aren't comfortable, and if they're breathing hard, it's just gonna add to problems. But the idea that the PE teacher would come up with lessons where, maybe some of the activities that they're doing are more physically distant. And then when we get into category orange, that singing would not be incorporated unless it could be outdoors or in a single person use space. So one example of that, we have that recording studio. Someone could sing in that recording studio and then we could disinfect it. We're looking at purchasing some UV light disinfectors that would go in a room and could do up to a 600 square foot room, and you would set them down, you turn them on, they blast UV light out for an hour. They have a little safety sensor. If someone comes within 10 feet of it, it shuts off. But the janitor would close the door, turn it on, and run its hour cycle. It actually generates ozone too, which is naturally a virus killer. And then it'd run for an hour and then you'd leave it off for an hour and the ozone would naturally decompose again, and the room would be disinfected. So found a good set of those that came recommended from an architect engineer, that are about $400 a piece. And so I'm working on getting those ordered. At least several for kind of those type of purposes, and maybe just regular, room disinfection purposes. And then just the last piece about managing staff quarantines and isolation. So that, is going to be continued work that we do. It's not just bus driver subs, but it's teacher subs too. And then requiring teachers to have completed lesson plans in advance with considerations for potential online. So that might be where a staff member comes down with it and we have to go online and we need, lesson plans for a certain period of time. We already require lesson plans in our policy, but this would be that Jackie and myself have access to those plans, so that in the event of a quarantine or isolation where a teacher can't teach actively, we have those plans available all the time. But I think that's the big stuff there. Lots of helpful websites and links. And then I just shared with you the daily home screening for students. Oh, actually though, I forgot. I don't know why I didn't start it. Back to screening. I hope I made this change. My thought with screening, I gotta check my language. My thought with screening after talking to parents is that we will screen students here at school, just for kind of, because there's some concern, I think, amongst parents that screening, just screening at home for the first 2 levels doesn't give them much kind of security that it's actually being done. And so we would incorporate in our screening, a staff and student survey. Maybe it's brief. Staff felt like it was very doable at the beginning of the day as kids were getting started on work. It would be 1 time a day, and it would be perhaps just a few questions, and could potentially even be done with like a little Google form to check for symptoms and a fever. So that was the other change with screening. So that is the screening document that the CDC released. Those are going to be the main things that we look for, is the temperature, the sore throat, an uncontrolled cough, diarrhea, vomiting, or abdominal pain, and then a severe headache. There's other symptoms to COVID, but those are the main ones. And then obviously if you've been in contact with someone with COVID, and being able to answer those questions. Page 23 and 24 are flow charts that I developed for if a staff member has been exposed and what that's going to look like. And then also if a student has been exposed and what that is going to look like. And so you can kind of take a look at that. It has to do with, were they wearing a mask? Did they conduct testing on the student? We will never be able to require someone to take a COVID test. And there are very likely people out there who would refuse to take one. Anyways, so that's something that we have to kind of have in our plan. Same with staff members, although I can certainly not allow them back onto campus unless they've isolated for the required amount of days if they're exhibiting symptoms. So that's that. And then the last is just a little bit of the response plan that has been there. And a few more documents, as public health still has not finalized their health alert levels. They're still working on it. Carol thought she'd have a document to me maybe by the end of the week. And then we have the self-screening tool, a contact tracing report in case we have to share data with the public health district. And then also our documents, our online learning documents. So that is the reopening and schools operation plan. I'm sure it will change throughout the year as we learn and adjust. My prayer is that this whole thing kind of starts to reduce in a natural way, or through science as well, one of those two, and that we can kind of return to normal. I was very careful and I'm always careful when I talk to people in the letter that I have at the very beginning, that I don't believe that this is a new normal. My belief is that this is a temporary normal. What temporary means, I don't know. I wish I could tell you. A year, a 2, 6 months, I'm not sure. But there's no evidence that required mask wearing in 1918 stuck for very long when we had that flu outbreak. I don't think people would put up with it for the rest of their lives. But in this temporary circumstance, as science and the health professionals are trying to figure it out, I do think it's a good temporary protection.
Thank you very much. I think that it's an amazing amount of work that you've done with parents and teachers and administrators and staff. Just really appreciate this. I like the flow charts, by the way. I just love flow charts. Any questions or comments on this document or suggestions for further development from the board?
No, I think constantly changing.
Yeah.
You've done a great job with the information that you have.
That's my little warning that I'm talking too much right there. Okay, so I do need to submit to the state our plan as we reopen. So I would, my recommendation is that the board approves it and then we move forward knowing that it's likely to change.
Is there, as far as the health symptoms, say, compared to normal flu symptoms, basically, if the kid has a fever, they're going to be sent home. And then, will they have to, how's that flow in the flow chart thing?
Yeah, so that's a known exposure. So if at this point, if a kid were to have flu symptoms and maybe didn't want to get tested, or maybe called their medical provider and said, well, we don't really recommend testing with those symptoms, let's see where it goes. When their symptoms resolve for 24 hours, that would include a fever and all those other symptoms, then they could return back to the classroom without us, jumping to the assumption that it's COVID every single time. So at this point, that would be the protocol, that symptoms have to be resolved for 24 hours before you return to the school. Now, if they have a known exposure to COVID or something like that, that would be treated differently. And the public health district would, if you've had exposure and you're getting symptoms, you're going to be recommended to quarantine at home for the 10 days from the symptoms onset.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? Well, I think we're ready to move forward. I'm excited. I've talked to parents and students from other large districts around the state in the last couple of weeks, and they're just like almost green with envy, really, that the situation we have to work with much, much better than a lot of schools are dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have a motion to move forward with this, I believe.
I move to approve the reopening of school operations 2021 plan.
Thank
I'll
you.
second.
Great. Who was that seconding? Was that
Second, Carrie.
Carrie seconded that? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote. Anybody opposed? Any abstaining? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for all the work on this. Thank you, board, for your work on this and your review and work together with the community on it. It's really something we never thought we would do, and here we are doing it. So next on the agenda is just a discussion item for some COVID-related budget items.
So An example of how we're trying to figure things out as the state is trying to figure things out. I just got another email, maybe it was over this weekend, maybe it was today, I don't remember, that this application has actually changed again, which is due or beginning due on August 14th, although they're going to roll it out slowly, as people apply. So that's not a hard deadline. It's a soft. This blended learning grant comes from coronavirus funds through the CARES Act. No, excuse me, not through the CARES Act, through the coronavirus relief funds, I think, isn't that right? Marcy and I are still trying to figure it all out. We have 5 pots of money to various amounts. There's a wonderful spreadsheet that she has. This is the largest of the grants that are coming from the federal government, and I just wanted to make the board aware. I call around and ask other superintendents what they're doing, and it's really, I guess, diverse. Sometimes just the superintendent is writing the whole thing. A couple are they just hand it off to their tech director to fund the whole thing. I would like to just kind of continue to have a conversation and get ideas from you guys too. The dollar amount for our school district is about $101,000, which is relatively large. And it's a complicated formula how they get to it, but it involves like how many free and reduced lunch kids you have, et cetera. It is specific to these, the use of funds is specific to getting devices for students, which right now we're sufficient barely to have 1-to-1 for every kid. And a lot of schools are struggling right now that didn't have Chromebooks, because it used to be you could order Chromebooks and have them here in a week or two. And while we're not in a panic, the conversations that I've had with my vendors for even getting like 50 devices, so we have some backup ones that are new with this money, are getting into late October for delivery. So, and they say what's holding them up is the microchip manufacturers like Intel and AMD can't make the chips fast enough. So they've got plastic computers sitting there without a microchip in it. But other things that it can be spent on and something to consider are connectivity for students. There are other federal grants that local internet providers are competing for right now to increase connectivity to our region. But this would be ideas like we could certainly fund what we did last year, where some families are provided with like a cellular MiFi, or even the potential that the district could set aside money to pay an internet bill for a family that was deemed in need. That gets really tough, because it's like then all of a sudden we become like the means testing, and how do we want to, do we just do it? Anyone who asks could get a little bit of money to be connected, or how would we manage that? Would they perhaps have to be free and reduced lunch to qualify for that payment? But you could make direct payments for students to be connected. Infrastructure for staff. I do think a good use of this is to update our laptop situation for our staff members. And I've already sought out some high quality kind of business grade laptops that I think would be good for our staff. And so I have that built in. Also assistive technology. I have a quote out for some robotic, you put your Chromebook or your laptop on this robotic stand, and then you put a little tracker in your pocket. So a teacher teaching online would be able to walk around the room, and this little tripod would basically just follow the teacher to whatever board they're at, and so they could have a classroom discussion with someone who is online without just sitting right in front of their laptop. So those are they run between $800 to $1,000 a piece. So that's an option. A learning management system. I know there's been a big push for that at the state level. I really feel like as small as we are, we use Google Classroom. There's other ones out there like Blackboard, and there's lots of other ones too, Brain Honey and some other things. But I feel like Google Classroom is sufficient and does what we need in our little district. We don't have a whole bunch of management that needs to be done. And it's free, which is really tempting too. It continues to be free. And then also professional development. So I've reached out to a couple of people. Lynn Wessel's a former teacher, to see if she might be able to consult for us a little bit and provide some, because teachers are so busy in the day to day, it would be nice to have someone contracted that could just, for a small amount of money, provide an occasional training for our staff on kind of best practices. And Jackie's also had been in conversations with LCSC specifically for the secondary about kind of a professional development opportunity for that too. I don't know. Do you have anything else to?
It's actually K-12.
K-12. Okay.
Yeah. She was a elementary teacher, and then middle school teacher, and now she teaches college, and she's got her doctorate in technology education. So this is kind of her baby, and she has seen it grow over, and she's really excited about it.
So what would happen is this application would just continue. It kind of have to line stuff out. The other pots of money, there are pots of money for kind of responding to coronavirus. So we're ordering more fans for air circulation. We will order those UV light things, masks, hand sanitizer, which is also back ordered, and we've got again enough to start the school year, but we don't have enough to last the school year at this point. And just other disinfecting chemicals. One frustrating thing with all of this, and I think I mentioned it at the last meeting, is that none of this is really difficult to use for personnel. It's just federal money, and they really have not made it that an easy process. And that actually includes the state too, and some of the state rules through the controller's office. So, but we can buy stuff with it a lot easier. There is also the potential with this, as we talk about things, this one, you could use some of these coronavirus monies to expand space for kids to be educated into. And so that's the other piece and part of the conversation, is that there could be money to, even if it was, the roof of a structure to keep weather off people's backs, you could think about an outdoor, I think about a steel building that might happen to be the size of a basketball court that would maybe not be finished, but would be a covered area to expand students. That could potentially be in some future iteration.
It's real easy, just a bus barn that has a roof.
Yeah,
buses.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So,
love that creative thinking.
anyways, that is that plan, and I'll continue to work on it. So any insight I'm sure we'll continue to talk about it as we move forward. But
when's that plan going to be submitted then?
Well, I don't think we're in any rush, honestly, with any of the technology. So it has to be spent. We have to have it expended by December 31st. That's the tough part about that. So when I say there's no rush, there is a rush. Did Marcy pass out when I said that? It's nice to get that money spent rather than just kind of have it sitting out there and not knowing. The application opens up in 4 days. We can submit, and that's just a soft deadline. And they'll take applications all the way into December as we kind of finalize them and go through our planning. My thought, though, is that at the very least by the next regular board meeting, early in September, that plan would be done and you guys would be able to see it. That plan, I don't believe, I should double check, but I don't believe it requires board approval.
Great.
But in an ideal world, I would form a committee of parents and maybe a board member and staff to kind of talk about it. The one difficulty with that is I've already, tapped out on a lot of people, and they're like this parent committee, this poor parent committee that's meeting about the online learning. We've already invested, 5 or 6 hours in meeting and discussions, and it'll likely be another 5 or 6 more. Hopefully they're not listening in right now.
Yeah. Thank you for the update on that plan. Any questions, comments? Okay, we'll look for that. If you have any interim, you can communicate that to the board. before the next meeting. But otherwise, we'll look for that at the next meeting. Sounds like to me that you're doing. I think you're kind of uniquely suited with the technology thing to develop this at this point. So I think that's good to move forward.
It is nice on that plan. They have you list the superintendent and the tech director right at the very top. So it's kind of
Perfect.
kind of fun.
Yeah. Okay, let's where we have now our reports. K-12, Mrs. Mossman.
Okay. Jumpstart is going on, and it's quite successful. We're kind of a testing ground for masks and sanitation, and we know now the masks do not go out for recess because they become toys. There are 12 students. They meet Monday through Thursday, 8:30 to 11:30. The dates are August 3rd through the 20th. And there's a lot of times that outdoor space is used, and we use the outside doors at the kindergarten and the library. And kids are being rotated between, and it's working out very well. We have other areas outside that she's using. We have, I counted about 14 new families, 21 new students coming in this year, 16 elementary and 5 in the high school. No junior high students at this time. Teacher PD, I usually collect, in the spring, I usually collect what the teachers are going to be planning on doing, and it works out better to do it this time of year. But 13 staff have taken over 30 different courses from spring to now, and some are in those courses at this time. And the nice thing about the variety of it is that just makes everyone richer for the experiences that they're having. This included the remote learning course that was offered this spring through LCSC, and I just kind of monitored that and collected things for them. We do have Dr. Malia McCulley from LCSC. She's putting together a workshop just for Nezperce. It's called Plugging In and Powering Up. It's all about online learning environment, enriching that, and helping teachers develop tools and strategies that will help them do a better job right now. We are going to be surveying the staff when they return, just a brief survey to help her kind of make this a course, a workshop that just works really well for what we need. Sports, football and volleyball officially began today. Volleyball is this morning, football tonight?
Yep.
Okay. And there's other like cross country meeting tomorrow, and there's a schedule for those. Talked to Susan today, buildings are ready. She has a few things that she's gonna finish up. The roofing materials are here, and those kind of things. She's, it looks really nice. She does a very good job. First day meetings for all students. We're not quite sure. I've been working with ASB on this, but they really liked, they talked about having the clubs and CT advisors talk about what these clubs and offer and CT offers, because the freshmen sometimes really don't understand, and sometimes it gives the kids that are maybe sophomores, juniors, I want to try something else. It gives them more of a variety of things, as if we have a lot of things here for as small as our school is to do. I met with high school officers, ASB officers, and they sponsored a movie night August 8th right here on the Hill. We had probably 30 kids that came, and they put their blankets out in space, wore a mask, passed their annuals around and signed them and watched a movie. We are also organizing that first day school schedule, which I mistyped below. It's September 1 for secondary, not August 31st. Yes. So first day of school for elementary would be September 2nd. The open house, we're going to modify it this year. It'll be August 31st, and we're going to be scheduling times for students to visit their classrooms, especially our new families who really want to meet the teachers and see, so that aren't too many families in the classroom all the time.
So likely thinking like by last name, you would have an assigned.
Probably, yeah. Mary has put together when we did our pickup and delivery of supplies when we had to close this spring, and we already have that document that kind of tells us how many members, and so we can rotate families through that way. We just move it so it's a little easier. We have multiple children, they'll have a little extra time to move through. So that'll that's all I have, unless you have any other questions.
Thank you very much. busy time. Anybody have any questions or comments?
You know, Kelly said, what about junior high football?
So junior high football, it was kind of off our radar, but they are meeting. They have a
I
meeting.
think it was on our.
And I think, so if my understanding was correct, the coach posted a meeting without talking to Cal yet. So we're figuring that out. But
It says.
I do expect junior high football to start before school starts because they need those extra practices to get going.
Thursday, August 13th at 7. It says mandatory junior.
Thursday, 13th at 7.
At 7, outside the multipurpose room.
Up here.
Yeah. And then junior high cross country will meet tomorrow, and I don't think we'll start with them running cross country right off the bat, but soon after. And the high schoolers will start practicing on Wednesday. And then junior high girls basketball it normally just starts when school starts, first day of school.
Thank you. Mr. Teagues, your report.
Yeah, and I did not submit a report because I figured I had plenty to talk about. And
Yeah, you've actually exceeded your quota of talking.
Yeah. So as a gift to all of you, I did not submit a report.
Well, thank you. Do you have anything to report verbally or?
No, I think we've kind of covered the main things. All of this work is just ongoing and continuing. And I would reiterate for those that are listening, I am planning on having this tele-town hall, I'm calling it, with myself kind of leading it on Thursday at 7. And then on Monday at noon, I thought I'd catch some people, maybe if they'd rather just do it on their lunch break. And then Tuesday at 7 again in the evening.
Okay.
And those, if anyone's listening, those would not be, you wouldn't have to attend all 3. It's just kind of a chance for people to ask me questions. And hopefully I can kind of guide them through what things might look like.
Right. Since you don't have a report, I've got just briefly, I appreciate the board's patience tonight, but briefly 3 things to report from the executive board meeting of the ISBA. First of all, we're not going to hold our convention in person in Sun Valley. Most of you probably got an email about this. It was a difficult decision, but we'll be doing it online. Second of all, we have 2 upcoming issues, one being a change in dues structure, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But one I wanted to mention is right now, we got a situation where we've had quite a number of series of executive officers of ISBA from small schools. It's kind of like this. Bigger schools like Ada, like in Ada County or Nampa School District, such like that, they have a hard time getting their board members elected to the ISBA executive board. I'm not sure all the reasons, but some of them are kind of political. They're being from more like the blue part of the state, whereas the red part of the state is a big number of board members. And when we vote for board members, it's a one-on-one vote kind of thing. So they're proposing a change, and I think it's a really good change because sometimes we're not seen as really representing the whole state when we don't have members on our executive board from those really big districts. That every other year, the vice president for the executive board of ISBA would be from a large to medium district. And then the other opposite years, the vice president would be from the small and extra small districts. This would make it, that vice president doesn't necessarily go forward to be president-elect, but certainly give them an inside track to do that if they desire to do that. So I'm hoping that next month I'll give you the wording on this. I'm hoping our district would be able to be a co-sponsor of this. I think it's really important for ISBA to maintain their credibility. So that's it, but I'm bummed. I haven't been a long time since I've been at a convention in Sun Valley. I was looking forward to that. hopefully we can reschedule it in a couple of years. In fact, the contract kind of stipulates that we reschedule in a couple of years. So when things get better, we will. Okay, thank you for taking a moment. I was just considering that piggybacking on the superintendent's report. So that's wasn't on the agenda. Thank you very much for your patience. I know this is a long meeting. Rhonda Wemhoff would really not like this length of meeting, but we had a lot to do. I appreciate your patience. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Thank you, Quinn. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Carrie. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we're adjourned. Oh, is there anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Nope. Okay, then we'll adjourn. Thank you very much. Hope to see everybody next month. I plan to be there. It's a little easier when I'm there, but this